Zoro vs. Luffy is one of those fights that exist in the community, but only a certain group of people take seriously. Like, it's just there, and you can't really get rid of it because that certain group of people are plentiful, but deep down, we all know the answer. Luffy wins 10 out of 10 times. But let's entertain the idea for a second. And in today's video, we'll do exactly that. What's up guys, Gamblrr here, and today we'll be doing the Zoro version of the Sanji video we did. No, I was not going to put Zoro up against Sanji's opponents, be for real. Who would want to see Zoro versus Mr. 2? Exactly, no one. Anyways, can Zoro get through the gauntlet? Let's find out together. Before we get into it, let's make a deal. You like and enjoy the video, and I deliver more content. It's a win-win for both of us. I think by now you'd understand the rules of these kinds of videos. Zoro's in the version he was in during the time Luffy fought a certain opponent. So in Alabasta, Zoro will be used if we're putting Zoro against Crocodile, or a Wano Zoro will be used if we put him against Kaido. Luffy went through many fights, and obviously I don't want to be forced to edit like a 40-minute video, so we'll be going over fights that are actually important to the story overall. Like, I'm not about to do Zoro versus that one sheep guy from Buggy's crew. We know Zoro one-shots him, but we're not going to waste our time going over it. We're going to keep score as always, but if I mess up the final number, I didn't. You didn't see anything. Anyways, let's get straight into it, starting off with Luffy's first fight versus Alvida. East Blue fights are always hilarious to me because most of the people Luffy meets and goes against already know Zoro because of how clouded he was. This was especially true for Alvida, who immediately thought Zoro was after her through Kobe. The funnier part about it is that she wasn't even scared of the idea. Obviously her head was inflated, but it was just a little comical to see her smile at the idea of Zoro hunting her. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. Luffy literally one-shot her with a Gum Gum pistol. I don't really remember how it went in the anime, but in the manga, he just tanks the mace, then punches the crap out of her. Zoro can easily replicate this, even in the starving state he was in when Luffy went to meet him. I mean, he literally one-shots Morgan, someone much more formidable than Alvida, so put that W on the board for Zoro. The next fight on the list is actually Buggy, and for some reason, I was trying to read through for some feats and forgot that they literally fought. Zoro lost because he genuinely cannot beat Buggy. He is Zoro's direct counter. With the Chop Chop fruit, Buggy is basically immune to slashes because it just chops his limbs into smaller limbs that he can manipulate freely. Add on the fact that when Luffy was fighting Buggy, Zoro was injured from him before, so we get a weakened and tired Zoro versus a character he can't deal with in swords play. I don't think no sword style can work here either. Buggy can just escape any hold or any confrontation with his devil fruit and eventually continue to injure Zoro with his tricks. Just put the L on the board. Luffy fights Captain Kuro in Usopp's village, and this one is pretty interesting. No one ever thinks about Kuro, but I remember I saw someone say he actually has Shave, the thing that CP9 uses, and that Oda confirmed it. I'll look it up for editing purposes, but we see high speed movement during his fight with Luffy disappearing from his sight. It's funny though because despite doing this, every time he tries to attack Luffy, Luffy's able to react right before being hit. Luffy and Zoro are relative in stats at this point in the series, so anything he could do speed wise, Zoro should be able to replicate to a certain extent. During the arc, Zoro goes against the two strongest commanders from Kuro's ship, one-shots both of them, and then has to fight against a superpower version of the stronger of the two that was casually breaking through the ground with kicks. Zoro's still able to one-shot him soon after, but Kuro himself is still just on another level. Something I found pretty interesting was the fact that Kuro actually just casually has 10 swords in his hand. I'm pretty sure that's something Zoro can't cut through or break outright just yet because they're steel, but there's an argument to be made that the steel used for those blades aren't of the utmost quality. I mean, they literally broke from some rocks. Kuro is literally only dangerous when he enters that mode where he doesn't even know where he's cutting because he's going too fast. Before that, Luffy easily starts reacting to his speed, but funnily enough, after it, Luffy gets hit once and uses it as a chance to grab onto him and stop him from doing the move ever again. Zoro should be able to do it. Heck, we see bro do something like it with King and Wano. he should be able to block or at least leave himself vulnerable to an attack just to counter with max strength, and I think a full strength counter should take Kuro out of the fight. If not, multiple, because Zoro would eventually adjust to his speed if exposed to it too much times. Put a W on the board. In the next arc, Luffy fights Don Krieg, and funnily enough, when he fought Don Krieg, Zoro was on the Zoro was about to die. He just took an attack from a Yonko level character. Obviously, Zoro loses here, and I'll put that on the board, but let's entertain the idea for a second. How would the fight have gone if he fought Krieg at full health? Don Krieg's greatest selling point is his armor that's made of steel. Again, Zoro can't cut through that during this point of the story, so he'd literally have to aim for his head, which he might be able to do. We see Luffy just outright cook him in stats, and the only reason it was a close fight was because of all the tricks Don had up his sleeve. All Zoro has to do is, well, cut the guy's head off, or he can aim for his leg and turn him into a legless pirate. Anyways, I do think Zoro can beat Don, but rules are rules. Put the L on the board. Luffy fights Arlong after a grueling period of pacing where he's stuck underwater while everyone's fighting the other fishmen. Again, just like the last fight, Zoro loses. I mean, we see it outright. Zoro is so injured, even Arlong's scared for him. That is an L, but this matchup is genuinely interesting. First off, we see Arlong literally bite and break a sword from Luffy. Obviously, Luffy has zero swordplay and was making that point in the first place, and so Zoro should have more finesse and strength behind his swings. Luffy and Zoro were pretty relative in stats, with Luffy at times literally blissing him, so Zoro should be somewhat able to do the same. To be honest, I can see Zoro edging out the win. He's definitely got the AP to do it. He just has to watch out for Arlong's teeth. That can be a real nuisance. If Arlong gets to bite his blade or blades, I think it's over, but otherwise, I think Zoro takes it. However, it's still an L on the board, so let's keep going. We're gonna skip Little Garden and go straight to Drum Island, where Luffy fights Wapol. I think Oda genuinely has Zoro act like a numbnut the entire arc, because it was so obvious he would have deleted Wapol in a second. In fact, I think it was actually implied Sanji himself, who was weakened, was going to be a powered up Wapol who fused with his two commanders. Zoro easily takes this. Put a W on the board for my guy. Next is the Alabasta arc, and yeah, we're in for some cool conversations. Luffy had like 3 fights with Crocodile, 2 of which he literally lost and should have died in. But he didn't, and he came back the 3rd time with a new plan to get around Crocodile's main selling point, his intangibility. Crocodile is a Sandman. He ate the Suna Suna no Mi to become a Logia with sand powers. And so at this point, and for the rest of the pre-time skip, Luffy and the rest of the crew can't really box with Logias without literally using elements opposite of the Logia. Luffy got through the Crocodile by using water first, and then in his final fight, he uses his blood's moisture. Funnily enough, in the same arc, Zoro unlocks what seems to be literal haki. Zoro is basically the only one who can unironically get through Crocodile's intangibility, but the fact is that he can't really use it at will. Anyways, when I see people go over this fight, apparently it's like taboo to say that Zoro can edge out the win. Luffy and Zoro were relative at this point. Heck, they had a fight like not too many chapters before this, and as soon as Luffy got a way to get through Crocodile's Logia, he won Extreme Diff. There's also Crocodile's poison, which he outright tells Luffy about, and with Zoro having a blade to keep his distance for the most part, he shouldn't have to worry about that. I think Zoro actually goes Extreme Diff with Crocodile. Ishishi Sansan won't one-shot him obviously, but on the other hand, the only thing Crocodile can really do to Zoro is like suck out his moisture, which I don't ever see happening. This is all under the assumption that Zoro's passively using Breath of All Things, by the way, so he's taking an L for the video, but as a real fight, I think it could go either way. Put an L on the board though. We enter Skypiea and we have another dangerous Logia that Luffy just happens to counter completely. Zoro literally went against him in the story and lost very badly, but we actually see that he can put up a fight in stats just like Luffy did, going back to what I said a little bit earlier. Put the L on the board though. Water 7 runs, and I'm not about to go over Zoro vs Usopp or Zoro vs Frankie, so we'll go over the fights Luffy has in Enies lobby. Luffy enters first and fights Blueno using Gear 2 for the first time. Even before it, Luffy was able to match Blueno's speed despite having Shave in his arsenal. With Gear 2, he outright just blitzes him multiple times, then hits him with 3 attacks, eventually leading to Blueno getting knocked out. In hindsight though, Blueno is absolute fodder. He had an 820 Doriki level. His iron body shouldn't be anything scary compared to Kaku or Jabra. Zoro during his fight with Kaku shows us multiple named attacks, all of which should be able to outright just cook Blueno, so put the W on the board. As for the next fight, things are getting crazier. We talked about how Blueno is fodder compared to Kaku and Jabra, which is true, but then almost the same thing could be said about Kaku and Jabra compared to Lucci. Lucci in complete base had a 4000 Doriki level, and he, along with Jabra, is able to use a zone form and hybrid form on top of that. Zoro was out here getting the worst from Kaku, who didn't know anything about his devil fruit. This isn't to say Zoro can't box with Lucci, maybe he can hold his own against base Lucci, but hybrid just destroys him. He's too fast, way too strong, and I think it's pretty logical to assume that he's the most durable of all the CB9 members. Put an L on the board. In Thriller Bark, we see a whole bunch of BS, to be honest. Luffy absorbs 100 shadows and becomes Nightmare Luffy and solos ores. Mind you, the entire crew was fighting this monster before Luffy pulled up, and then after cooking him, Luffy fought a Maria who absorbed even more shadows. This is such a weird arc to go over. Zoro can't possibly beat Maria, I'm not gonna lie. Despite him having an obvious weakness, that being spitting out shadows after being hit, Zoro doesn't have the power Luffy has unless he uses Ashura. And he doesn't even use Ashura when Kuma pulls up, so I'm not gonna assume he's using it here. There's also the fact that bro didn't even have a shadow, so he has to defeat Moria before the sun rises, which he very clearly cannot do. The sun rose in one chapter, by the way. Yeah, put the L on the board. The next arc, Zoro is like basically crippled. He took Luffy's pain the arc prior, so the condition he was in was just ridiculously bad. Obviously he's not beating Kuma, so that's an L, but then he'd be sent to Amazon Lily in the next 3 days. 3 days is actually pretty good for Zoro since he has to recover a little bit. Obviously he's not fully healed, but it is something. To be honest though, ain't nobody care about the in quotations fights that happen on Amazon Lily, so let's get into what actually matters. Luffy versus Magellan. This is actually pretty close considering how trash Magellan is. Alright, I'm kidding. Despite me wanting to say Zoro can extreme diff this, he really can't. Magellan is just way beyond his pay grade in terms of lethality. If any poison hits Zoro, he's done for. Easily an L, so put 2 L's on the board. I was thinking about putting Zoro in Marineford, but obviously he'd be even more of a nuisance than Luffy was, so let's just skip past that. Finally entering the post time skip, Luffy fights against Hody Jones. Funnily enough, that boy Zoro also fought Hody Jones underwater with no haki or named attacks and one-shot him. Easily a W on the board. He could scarf down 200,000 drugs, he's still not beating Zoro, and that's a fact. Coming out of Fishman Island, Luffy fights Caesar Clown like 2 times. The first time he's halted by Monet. If you put Zoro in that situation, he might just walk away and give up, you know, since he's misogynistic. But the second time, Caesar's yapping about his effed up plans to Luffy, and Luffy just punches him mid-sentence. This was off guard, sure, but let's be real, he could have done the exact same thing if he was on guard. Funnily enough, he literally does that. Caesar tries to pipe up using a huge form like every other villain ever, and Luffy just one-shots him with a bigger attack. Zoro is probably one-shotting him just like he did to Hody. He has to use haki this time though because Caesar is a Logia, so it's even more lethal. Caesar was really never strong, he was just annoyingly slippery. Put the W on the board for my guy. In Dressrosa, Luffy goes through an entire tournament to get Ace's Devil Fruit. No, I'm not about to go over all that, just know Zoro would have won that tournament just as easy. We all know what we're here for, Zoro versus Doflamingo. Just like Zoro versus Crocodile, it's like taboo in this community to insinuate that Zoro can stand a chance against Doflamingo, but honestly, I don't even see a reason this is the case. Zoro entered post type skip and never, not once, went all out until Wano. Fishman Island, the guy was snoozing. Punk Hazard, snoozing even more. Dressrosa, he finally used haki for the first time, but no one actually pushed Zoro. Obviously there's the ambiguous island buff that everyone refers to, sure, but in context, that really only happens when they go through an insane fight. This would have applied to say Alabasta, Skypiea, then Enies Lobby. Those 3 arcs had Zoro fighting for his life. This man literally hadn't bled until he entered Wano. I'm so serious. And the reason I'm hyping this is because I think the Zoro we saw in Wano is the Zoro we had literally throughout post time skip. And that's why I think Zoro can easily hang with Doflamingo. Now, he doesn't have Enma to suck out his haki and make it stronger, sure, but he does have Shusui and named attacks that anyone should be wary of. Luffy went Gear 4 against Dofi and mollywopped him. I'm not gonna say that Zoro can do that, but I think Zoro has the ability to push Dofi into his awakening. Even with his awakening, I think Zoro can fend off against him. It really all comes down to if Zoro can land any lethal attacks and consistently. To be honest, I can see it going down like Zoro vs Killer. Killer in that state might not be Dofi level since he doesn't have his usual weapons, but Zoro was also handicapped without his best weapon and had to improvise. Zoro might not one-shot him, but eventually his attacks will end the fight with Dofi. Put the W on the board. In Whole Cake Island, Luffy fought for like 12 hours against a guy named Cracker. Cracker is a weird guy. His fighting style is something that not many characters can get through, and Luffy was lucky that his Gear 4 was enough to get through the first line of defenses, his soldiers. With Nami there to help Zoro, I can actually see Zoro getting this pretty easily. Sure, Cracker's entire thing is not to get hit, and even if Zoro gets momentum and tries to attack him directly, Cracker can maybe hold his own. Zoro is that guy, and I'm going to get into it in a second, so just hear me out here. In the meantime though, put a W on the board. After this, Luffy fights Katakuri. I haven't talked about this guy since like 2023 or something. The funny thing about this is that I still remember the entire gimmick with him. He was super strong, super fast, but an absolute glass cannon. The point I always made back then was that if anyone was as fast as him or faster than him and had the AP to really do damage, they'd be able to defeat him, but I got hated on to no end. Ridiculous. As for a hypothetical Whole Cake Island Zoro, it gets kind of interesting. So what I was talking about just now in the Cracker fight is something that I found funny in hindsight. But on the rooftop, Zoro was casually outpacing Big Mom and keeping up with everyone else. But earlier I said a Wano Zoro shouldn't be that much different than the one we see post time skip. I think you can sense the disconnect here. It implies that this fresh out of time skip Zoro would be able to replicate what he did stat wise on the rooftop, but that would put Zoro at an absolutely ridiculous power level considering what Luffy had to get through to get to that level when he was on the rooftop. If I took what I said completely seriously, Zoro would have stomped Dofi because he just outstats him, but again, there's some ambiguity there. Obviously, Oda is not having Fishman Island Zoro outpacing Big Mom on multiple occasions, like let's be real here. The reason I'm talking about this is because Whole Cake Island and especially the Katakuri fight is like a little more than 100 chapters before the rooftop fight, so there really isn't any reason to assume that Zoro on the rooftop is so much different than this Zoro. So if that's the case, I think Zoro can genuinely give Cat a run for his money. I made a video about this matchup like almost 2 years ago now. Obviously that Zoro had Enma and already had advanced Conqueror's Haki. He doesn't have that here, so it's way harder to prove that he even has Gear 4 level attacks, let alone beyond that. The main thing I used to make fun of back in the day was the fact that base Luffy was able to damage Katakuri because his future sight wasn't on, so he couldn't avoid it. To be honest, what stat boost does future sight give you? I don't think there is one, so this is just outright an anti-feat. This is what's giving me leeway to say that Zoro can actually have a chance against him. I don't think Zoro's out here speed blitzing Katakuri unless Zoro uses Ashura, but outside of that he's going blow for blow with him. This is again because of his feats on the rooftop, and Ashura just outspeeds Hybrid Kaido during their confrontation. If Zoro can get through Katakuri's future sight and get attacks off, he will win. Katakuri isn't some endurance monster. He might have had some good stamina, but he does not have endurance. A reminder that Luffy hit him under 20 times and he gave himself an injury that Luffy had to inflict with more damage, and he still tapped out first. Katakuri is truly getting done up by Zoro if he lets him get close. Put the W on the board. Finally, we're entering the land of Wano. There, Luffy fights a whole bunch of fodder, but then confronts Kaido after he supposedly kills half of his crew. Yeah, put the yellow on the board. Luffy trains, gets better haki control, and gets an advanced variant of it, and the rooftop fight happens. Luffy's outperforming literally everyone else even before he gets Conqueror's coding, and as soon as he gets that, it's truly over and he takes over the fight by himself. During this time, Zoro is legitimately crippled. He's broken all of his bones and has to be held like a backpack for like 10 chapters straight. I don't even think this is fair to put in the video, so I won't count it because Luffy loses to Kaido pretty quickly, but he comes back to fight Kaido once again, and Zoro is actually up and active this time. At this point, Zoro is getting stomped by King. He's totally overrun by him, losing clashes, unable to deal with his versatility. It's literally a slaughter. Kaido would obviously and very clearly do him even worse, and that is until chapter 1033 when Zoro unlocks advanced Conqueror's haki. We talked about Ashura and how it was able to go blow for blow and actually outpace Kaido. In his advanced Conqueror's haki form though, Zoro is actually just outright stronger than his past Ashura variant as confirmed by the data book. He should be able to give Kaido the hands, and while we're on the topic, let's establish that this isn't a bad look for Kaido. Kaido doesn't take anyone seriously. He wasn't taking Zoro seriously when he was using Ashura, and that's why the fight looks so impressive. We saw Kaido's haki rise and saw him get stronger and use more abilities against Luffy when he was stepping to him. So again, Kaido being in quotations pressed by Zoro isn't really an anti-feat for him. Overall though, obviously this guy's not beating Kaido. Could y'all believe there were people out here saying Zoro would kill him? Y'all crack me up, man. Put the yellow on the board. Fresh out of Wano, Luffy enters Egghead Island and fights Lucci, who's wildin' out. Luffy doesn't take him seriously in the slightest, falling asleep while dodging his attacks and eventually almost knocking him out after 3 named attacks. We already saw Zoro fight Lucci and it wasn't as hard as other people insinuate it was. I think Zoro could have cooked Lucci earlier, it was just Oda holding him back. Agenda aside, Zoro locked in, took his sword, and one-shot him. What are we actually doing here? Put the W on the board. Luffy fought Kizaru as a way to stop him from killing Vegapunk, and Kizaru during this fight was nerfed and it was constantly getting worse as Luffy had the ability to actually stop him. Zoro on the other hand does not. We watched Luffy use his fastest form, Snake Man, on Kizaru. He stood there parrying all of his attacks, then one-tapped him. I'm sorry, but Kizaru's doing the exact same thing to Zoro. Zoro gets sent outside of the island and that's it for him. Put the L on the board right now. At the end of the video, this is Zoro's record. To be honest, as I was scripting this, I expected the actual record to be worse, but it's actually not that bad. Overall, I'd call this an impressive run. But what did you guys think? Let me know down in the comments, of course. Make sure to like and subscribe. And I'll catch y'all in the next one.